Yo, creeping in the dark, life nocturnal, dark and dark, both paths arboreal to terrestrial. Sticky toes gripping forest students that explore. Listen close, Gecko podcast, that's knowledge galore. Reptile talk, host Anthony and Jason. Trade secrets flow, no time wasted. From tropics to town, it's sight raining. With every chat, reptile game changing. Escaping heat waves, tan under rays, desert sand echoes, sun blazing days. Little hustlers, camouflage a maze, catch them speaking wisdom, the wild on replay.
All right, welcome everybody. Now we back with another one. Yeah. So today we got Mr. Roy in the house. What's going on, Roy? All right.
Oh, it's good. Glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. No, I said we listen to I know I listen to your podcast a ton. I love like one of my favorite ones is the Justin Munsterman one. That was one of my favorites.
Oh man, yeah. Justin's awesome.
That one
doing amazing
and
stuff.
like the Alan, I think it was the Alan Rapace one where you guys were talking about wrestling in the desert. That shit had me going.
We gotta make that happen for sure. Yeah.
Alan's a rough rider. So little show notes real quick, just to let you guys know. We have joined the Happy Dragons team. Roy, you want to kind of go over that a little bit? What is Happy Dragons all about?
Yeah, so Happy Dragons is an ethics-based kind of reptiles first platform, and basically it's offering a whole bunch of cool novel stuff. So there's like a breeder platform where breeders who are meeting certain ethical standards with their animals can offer their animals for sale and kind of build community there. But then also there's all these added features like supply discounts and stuff like that with various supply partners. And then the really amazing aspect I think is like the kind of community-based platform where there's like forums, there's Discord, and there's also like a ton of like live content, webinars, education for reptile keepers who are looking to improve what they're doing. That's my favorite part of it, honestly, is the education aspect. And so I've been working on some like webinars and lectures and kind of stuff like that. And there's also Q&As with experts in various different aspects of herpetoculture. Obviously, it's such a huge, broad field that like no one's an expert in everything, but you got your gecko experts and your blue tongue experts and blah, 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 blah. And so we're trying to get a bunch of different people like that on board to then offer content. And it's a really cool thing. Y'all should check it out. You can hit any of us up for the Discord link to explore what's happening over there. But it's a really cool new thing, and I think that honestly, I see Happy Dragons as something that's like kind of like responding to a need that's been there in herpetoculture for a long time, and I feel like they're just kind of trying to meet that in a cool new way, which is really exciting.
Nice. I think it has a promising future. There's definitely a need for it, a void to be filled, if you will. It's
definitely.
Yeah.
So we are here to talk about some Polychorus marmoratus, aka the monkey bush anole. I've been like crazy fascinated with these things for about like 5-6 months now.
Yeah.
At first, like I saw one morph market and I was like, what the hell is this shit? Like, is it an anole? Is it a lizard? What is it? So that one of the reasons I definitely wanted to get you on here. I saw them on your website. I saw how you had a nice detailed care guide on them. So definitely I was like, well, let's go ahead and get this person on here that's really went into detail with everything. So can you kind of just describe what's their natural habitat looking like, and how can we recreate that over here?
Yeah, totally. So they're really cool, weird lizards, and like I had kind of a similar journey with them of just like, what the hell are these things at first? What's the story? Because they're so unusual. And so I did kind of a bunch of deep diving online as much as I could, Google Scholar articles and anything I could find basically about them. But essentially in their natural range, so Polychorus marmoratus is the main one that you see in herpetoculture. There's like, I think 8 or 9 species in the genus now, but only a couple that show up in herpetoculture, and marmoratus is the most common. And it's one of those weird species from the Amazon where it's actually like probably a species complex where there's a bunch of different species that all basically look the same. But the ones that we're getting are from the Guyana Shield, up at Suriname, Guyana. and they're, you know, a jungle forest edge dweller species. So they like a lot of light and sunlight. So they're not kind of like a shade dwelling kind of understory species, but more of a canopy species. But they apparently are really tolerant to like disturbed habitat, and so apparently you can find them like in urban gardens, like in Paramaribo, you know, and Georgetown, in the cities down there. They just like hang out in people's gardens, and you see them on hedgerows and stuff like that. So they're pretty tolerant, but you know, very very highly arboreal lizards in terms of habitat.
Nice.
So are these Jason? When Jason, I see, I know nothing about them, so all of my questions are genuine and
Yeah,
sincere, if you will. What
yeah,
are they? What are these things? Are they not
yeah,
anoles? Jason said they're
yeah,
not
yeah,
anoles. So what exactly are these lizards classified as, or what does science know them as a
yeah, yeah.
lizard?
That's a great question. So basically, for a long time, they were thought to be closely related to anoles. And I think that that was mostly based on morphology, because if you look at them, they do kind of look like really big anoles, kind of similar to like the crown giant anoles, like the, you know, your Cubans, your Smallwoods, all those guys. They're similar body plan, but with more recent kind of genetic, you know, data collection and all of that, they've actually been reclassified, and they're in their entire own family, which is the
Really?
Polycrotidae family. So they're off on their own, and they're actually, in terms of like what they're related to more closely, they're more closely related to like the Hoplocircids and the, so like things like the Engalioides laticeps, those really awesome Amazon dwarf iguanas that Justin Munsterman's working with.
Yeah, yeah.
They're actually closer to those guys than they are to anoles. But
Interesting.
the way that I think about them is basically they're the new world version of chameleons. So they occupy the same exact niche as the chameleons do, you know, but of course chameleons are all old world. We don't have any in the new world, um, or at least nothing native to the new world. But this is the kind of convergent evolution answer to the chameleon. So they have a similar body plan, highly arboreal. They do this overhand kind of walking along branches like chameleons do. They have color change ability similar to chameleons, and they also have the whole independently moving eyes thing like chameleons do. But they also have some differences. So they, first of all, they're capable of pretty rapid bursts of speed. Um, Unlike a chameleon, so they can jump, and they can move pretty quick when they want to, and they don't have the modified tongue, so that's different. But other than that, I think of them as very similar to chameleons, and I honestly think that like chameleon keepers would probably be really successful keeping polychrus if they were to try. I don't know anyone who has kept both, which is kind of funny because like I obviously I work with polychrus. I've never kept chameleons apart from like a veiled chameleon when I was a kid at one point. But I feel like if people that were like really successful working with things like the lowlands chameleons, like panthers, that kind of thing, were to give polychrus a try, I think they would absolutely kill it with them. They're super similar in terms of kind of behavior, and also I think their needs in terms of their care are pretty similar.
Interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
So are they kind of like,
Have you done field work? Have you been out there, watched them in the wild, or?
I haven't. That's one of my goals. I haven't yet gotten out there. I've been to the tropics a couple times in Costa Rica, and there actually is one species of polychrus that is in Costa Rica, but they're really hard to see because that species in particular is a canopy specialist, and so they're like way up in the trees. And usually when people find them, it's at night when they sometimes they'll descend down to the understory to roost at night on the smaller branches, and that's when people tend to find them. But I really want to get to Suriname at some point and go and see these guys in the field because they're not rare at all from what I've heard. They're pretty common, and so I think it would be a great species to like actually go and collect some data on in the field
Yeah,
because
hell
it's
yeah.
like there's actually a reasonable chance that you'll see them, you know. Whereas some of the other stuff I work with, like the spilotes, the snakes I work with, you know, they're down in Suriname, but the chances of actually, you know, making a trip around seeing a spilotes, it's like good luck. Oh, you're probably not going to see one. They're pretty obscure, so yeah.
oh, so are they ambush hunters?
That's a good question. Yeah, so they're kind of, yeah, they're similar. They're kind of like sit and wait, like passive feeding strategists, very much like chameleons. So, but they're a little bit more active in terms of like that, they'll run stuff down really fast and grab it. But I think that their natural feeding strategy is to kind of sit there pretty languid, pretty mellow on a branch and wait for an insect to come by, and then they'll pounce on it. And they will also consume some vegetation, and they'll consume fruit, berries, and stuff like that they really like. So I think they're pretty passive in terms of their feeding strategy. But one thing that I've noticed about them that's kind of cool is that they're really well adapted to take down really large insects for their size. And that's something I've actually kind of noticed is like a theme with those passive feeding strategist lizards, those kind of sit and wait lizards, because I think they spend so much of their time, there can be a long time between meals essentially, right? And I think that, sorry about that. I think I actually muted myself for a second.
Okay.
But they can go a long time between meals. And so because of that, they have to take advantage of those moments, right? And really smash that food when they can get it. And so, I noticed when I was like looking at them on iNaturalist and stuff like that, which is something I like to do with all the species I keep, that there were a bunch of pictures of them with like huge katydids or praying mantids or phasmids, stick insects in their mouths that looked like, how the heck can they even eat something that big? But they clearly were doing it. And so I kind of did an experiment, and I caught a praying mantis in my garden at one point, and I offered it to one of my wild caught females, and she went nuts. Like the craziest, most intense feeding response I've ever seen from one of these lizards. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. And so then I tried some stick insects, same thing. So they really love like big, kind of twiggy green insects. That's like what gets them going. But they'll eat all kinds of stuff. But that's like, if they could choose their diet, it would be big green bugs.
I'm working on raising some praying mantises myself for all my geckos. If you
Oh
go on
yeah,
eBay, you can buy, mantis pods and just hatch them
yeah,
yourself. So I want to introduce them into my collection as feeders. New Caledonia, most of my stuff, my lychees, everything's New Caledonia, obviously, but there's mantises there's a lot of them out there. So I assume myself that they're probably on the menu. So it's super cool to hear you say that, because I did this. That's how I started the whole thing. I found a couple in my garden as the seasons were changing. It was getting colder. They slow down and they almost like, they naturally just die off. So I grabbed a couple up and fed them to some of my bigger animals. And it was like, wow, like insane feeding response from these things. And I'm like, this is just natural. How do I get these things? So I started doing some research. And like I said, I found you can just buy mantis pods online and hatch them yourself.
Roy, you're mute.
sorry about that.
No, you're all good.
Keep on accidentally pressing that button. But yeah, you can. It's crazy because people get the mantis pods for like their gardens and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so yeah, you can get like they can hatch like 150 babies or something like that, something crazy.
God,
so it's kind of an interesting novel feeder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said they also eat like berries and greens. So what kind of stuff are you feeding? Are you offering that to them? And like, how often are you actually offering that stuff to them? Is it like treats, or is it kind of like a set routine with them getting some of those fruits and veggies?
Definitely more like a treat, just because I find that they don't always eat it. Like they're kind of picky, which is kind of funny. But I've fed them like they like red things. I've noticed like raspberries, little chunks of strawberry. I'll cut up strawberries, cherries. They like. It seems to be like red berries or red fruits for the most part, or their preference. But one thing that's actually really cool is I keep them in planted vivs with all live plants from that same region where they're from.
Nice.
And it's really fun. I love doing that. And one of the cool things that's happened with that is that I've got some aroids in there, some like, big broadleaved house plants, and some of them actually produce fruit, and they eat the fruit. They go nuts for it.
Wow.
So that's been really cool to see. Like literally, they're chowing down on these anthurium berries. That they would. I'm assuming they would eat them in the wild. If they're in the same range. And it was cool because the first time I noticed that, I wasn't even sure if it was the lizards that were eating them, because like I just went in there one day and this like inflorescence of berries that had been growing on one of the plants was just kind of gone. And I thought maybe it's like roaches are eating it at night, or isopods are eating. I think it might be the lizards, but I'm not sure. And then finally I caught him in the act one day, chowing on the berries, a couple months after that. And it was really cool to see that. So
Well, they say
I've started.
monstera fruits, the fruit from a
Oh yeah,
monstera, is one of the best tasting fruits even known to
yeah.
man. You know,
Oh yeah, totally. They'll. I'm sure they would go nuts for that too.
I have
Yeah, it's
monsteras in
really
all of
cool.
mine too. I keep them in there. They're like the
Yeah,
only plants I can really find that are thick enough to hold some of these monsters.
yeah. Monsteras are great for the vids. They're super tough. I like that about them.
So how are they pretty docile, or is it like they kind of little spastic like some of the other lizards?
Yeah. It's interesting because like the reason why I like originally like really fell in love with these lizards is because I found someone that had a captive hatched babies for sale. They'd gotten eggs from wild caught female, and I ended up buying a couple of these babies, and one of them ended up passing pretty early on. It was like actually an accident. It got like stuck in like a T5 reflector
Oh,
mounted
okay.
internally in the cage, which is like the only time I've ever had that happen with any animal. Is super huge bummer. But the other one was like the most personable, friendly lizard I had ever kept. Like she was incredible. Like I would walk up to the bib and she would come up to the glass and I would open the door. She would jump out on my shoulder. I could like sit there and hand feed her food, or she'd just take it out of my fingers.
Nice.
The friendliest lizard I've ever had. I've honestly never encountered another lizard that personable. No fear of me whatsoever. And so then I was like, these are freaking awesome lizards. Why is no one keeping these things? And I gotta figure these things out. And so I ended up building up a group of them, and I found that like most of the others that I have not been like that. They've been
Okay.
provided most of them have been wild caught, and the wild caught are definitely much more flighty. They don't really want to be held. They're not like gonna like bite the hell out of you or anything like that. But they don't like contact necessarily. They're more of a kind of like a chameleon. Like you just look
Like
at
look
them.
but don't touch.
Exactly, and that's like most of the lizards, right? Or like that, but I have found that with captive bred babies, if you work with them, like if your goal is to socialize them and like actually kind of build relationship with them, you can totally do it. And hand feeding is a great way to kind of establish that trust and relationship. And then I think they can be really really personable, but definitely with the wild caught, which is the vast majority of what people are gonna have options to work with these days. They're kind of more of a look don't touch species, I'd say. With captive bred, the options are more expansive. There's more potential there.
Okay. Yeah. So speaking of like socialization, right?
Yeah.
Now are they more of a like a one-on-one kind of thing, or can you have these in a group?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I keep mine in groups primarily, but this is actually like something that I'm still puzzling through, honestly,
Okay.
whether or not it's better to keep them solo or keep them in groups. So I've kept them in groups primarily. I've bred them successfully a handful of times now, and I've even raised the babies together. I've also tried raising the babies individually. I've done both, and I haven't really noticed a difference in their thriving,
Okay.
so to speak. That said, I do think with keeping adults, it's a good idea to keep them in a pretty spacious viv. So like if you're going to keep them in groups, you got to give them enough space so they can get away from each other for sure. And then the other thing is, I think that it can be helpful to have like a secondary smaller viv to be able to separate out the male periodically, because especially when they're breeding a lot, the males are just like Casanova, and they're just chasing the girls all the time.
Yeah.
And you'll notice like I've noticed sometimes with the females in that period of time when they're breeding a lot that they'll start to hide from the male. And if I notice that at all, I just separate him and just put him in his own bib for a while and give the girls a break.
What's your
Just so
ratio?
I usually do 1.2 groups.
Okay.
So that's what I've got right now. I recently have been like kind of drastically downsizing my herb collection, and so I had a slightly larger group, but I'm sending off a pair to Jason, who we were talking about earlier. I think he's going to do great with them. So he's going to
Yeah.
be getting a captive bred male that I hatched a couple of years ago, who's now an adult, and then a wild caught female that I got established, who I've at this point is almost a year in captivity. So I
Nice.
Does
think he's
this
going to do great with them.
species, do they have a dewlap? Is this one of the ones that has a dewlap?
They don't really display with a dewlap. No,
I was just
I
gonna
mean
ask
they do kind of have a Gular fan a little bit, but I've it's they only really extend it when they're pissed off.
Right.
And it's not like an Anole where it's like this big Gular fan, you know. It's just like they kind of inflate their throats a little bit.
Nothing during
Interestingly
breeding.
though, I've never seen it during breeding. There'll be lots of head bobbing and like maybe a little bit of Gular inflation, but not like a display kind of thing. One thing that's interesting though is like I do keep another species of Polychrus that's super rare. There's only I think two or three of us I think right now in the country that have them.
It's the Peruvian ones.
Yeah, the Peruvianus. Yeah,
They had the dewlap, right?
I love
and
those things.
they do a little bit more of that. Yeah, and it's mostly a threat display that I've noticed, but their dewlap is more colorful. It's like yellow,
Hmm.
whereas on the Marmoratus it's just white. You know, it's just the color of their throat scales essentially. And they seem to do a little bit more displaying with
Hmm.
the dewlap than the Marmoratus do. They're
Interesting.
really different, honestly. The Peruvianus, they're amazing lizards. They're sexually dimorphic, so the males have like a kind of white or brown head. It's really distinct from the body, and they also have a dorsal crest, so they have dorsal spines like an
Yeah.
iguana, and their gular fan also has a crest on it as well.
Is there any
And those
sexual
guys are cool.
dimorphism? Are the females?
Yeah, yeah. With Marmoratus, the interesting thing is that the dimorphism is that the females are way bigger.
Really?
And it took me a while to figure out how to accurately sex Marmoratus because if like I was like looking online and there's tons of misinformation about those lizards and some people were saying like, oh, the females have a brown stripe down their back, or something or other is an indicator. But now it's really easy for me to sex them. You can actually, looking at the hemipenal bulge is pretty obvious on adults, and the males have like the enlarged post-anal scales, like a lot of the anoles do, which is noticeable even as hatchlings. So I can sex them as hatchlings now.
Oh, nice.
But the really interesting thing is that yeah, the males on average top out around 20 to 30 grams, somewhere in that size range. And the females, I've had females as big as 80 grams.
Oh, damn.
So they're a
Wow.
lot bigger.
Yeah, that's
And I
like
think it's just
almost
because,
a little more double the size.
yeah, on average twice the size, and sometimes even three times the size. And so I think that's just because the females are producing those eggs, and so they gotta have a lot more capacity in the body plan for that. Interestingly, with the Peruvianis, they're roughly the same size. There's not really much of a difference, but Marmoratus, they're very different in terms of size.
Nice.
Yeah,
Now, so let's kind of get into their care of them, right? Like
yeah,
what kind of temps and like, because they're from South America, and what kind of temps and like humidity levels are we like striving for?
yeah. So I would say my temperature gradient that I aim for is kind of low 70s, mid 80s in terms of the ambience. But I give them a nice, really hot spot. I use halogen overhead lighting for them. And so, right under the halogens, I'm sure it's well above, 100 degrees, right under there. And they will bask sometimes. Although interestingly, they don't really spend a lot of time right under the halogen, like something like a beardy or a frilled lizard or something like that,
Yeah.
that they really like to hang out under the heat. They don't really do that so much. And so I think that they're kind of more kind of thermoconformers, so to speak, in terms of their thermal ecology. They don't really choose to be in the super hot basking area very often, which is just kind of interesting. But I keep them with that. And they also have, Arcadia UV and an LED as well. I try to keep a really nice bright vid because they're, like I said, mostly a canopy species, so they like light. Um, and in terms of the humidity, I think getting it up there is good. 70, 80% if you can is great. And one thing that I want to start experimenting with that I haven't yet is nighttime fogging. Um, because I think that again, like chameleons, there's a lot of data out there now about chameleons that like nighttime fogging is like a huge part of their hydration.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that could be similar with Polychrus because they're not going to drink from a bowl. They will drink droplets off of leaves, and so I have like a Miss King that goes in there goes off a couple times and a couple times throughout the day, and they'll go and they'll drink droplets off the leaves. But I have a feeling that hydration is like really critical to polychris care, because most of the wild caught that come in die because I think that they have renal failure from dehydration primarily is the major issue. And so, sometimes I'll have them, and I've had them established, like seemingly established, doing well for like 3 months, and then they'll kind of crash suddenly because I think of, essentially organ damage from dehydration. And so that seems really critical. And I think that fogging would really help with that. So that's like kind of the next thing I want to try in terms of their husbandry and working on that with them. In terms of the size of like the Viv and everything, I keep them in like a 4x2x4 is my groups, well, my 1.2 groups. And then the males, when I separate them out, they go into like a 2x2x3 for their solo quarters. And that seems to work really well so far. I think that, I'm definitely of the mind that like give things as much space as you can. So, kind of what I did is like I started with like the size of my room and was like, okay, this is how many Vivs I could fit in this room, or, this size of Viv. And I kind of worked backward from there for my animals, but trying to give them as much space as possible. But I think that that's a good size. You could probably keep an adult pair in something like a 3x2x3 or something like that, or 3 1836, one of the exos, something like that. But the more space, the better, I think, for them. And yeah, I'm trying to think what else. Kind of
Back
basic
to the lighting. Quick question, if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
mind, about
of
the
course.
lighting.
Please.
What percentage UVBs are you running? If they're at the top of
Yeah.
the canopies and they're up there, you're probably not running a shade dweller, would you?
No, so I use the 6% Arcadia, that's the forest bulb, but they can get pretty close to it. So I use my, solar meter or whatever, and they can get a pretty high UV output from that. So it's, it kind of depends on what your parameters are in terms of how close they can get to the bulb. But I'm sure something like a 12% would work if there was, more distance from the basking area.
Yeah. And I'm
But
guessing
I
you're
use the
probably
6%,
putting like
and I
right
think
on
work
top of the
great.
cage.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
I try to kind of group my lighting so they can get a little bit of everything in one area. So like the LED, the halogen, and the UV kind of overlap as much as possible. Obviously, it's hard
Okay.
to get them to perfectly overlap, but I'm trying to get that as much as possible. But also trying to get it so they can get away from each of those things. Like if they want to get the UV, but they don't want to be under the halogen, then they can do that. They can get over there. But yeah, I think that like Happy Dragons just said here in the chat, it's more about the distance from the bulb, in terms of the percentage you choose. But
Yeah, yeah.
I'm running 6% in my setups. That works perfect.
How valuable do you find that solar meter just as a keeper in general? How valuable do you think that is as a tool?
I think it's a great tool. It's super valuable. I think that it's worth the investment. Also, I mean, it's worth the investment too because you have an actual data-driven idea of how much output your bulbs are creating over time, and you'll find that in some cases, like especially with Arcadia lights, they've lasted way longer than a year in my experience. Still putting out good quality UV.
Absolutely.
And so it'll pay for itself, I think, especially if you have a modestly sized collection.
Absolutely.
Over
Especially if you
even
keep
just a
different
year.
species, and you're running different
Exactly.
percentages. I take bulbs from some of my bearded dragon tanks,
Yeah.
and they're still putting out, 7%, 6%
Yeah.
UVB after a year. I can move
Yeah.
them around. I put them back in
Yeah.
boxes. I mark what they were the last time I checked them. I hang them up, and if I need them, I got them. And I mean,
Exactly.
it's such a great gauge from when you're, from setting up enclosures and setting up lighting. And
Yep.
I think personally, I'm trying to spread the word that it is an extremely valuable tool if you're keeping animals under UV lighting. I mean, I think it's
Oh yeah.
essential, in all honesty.
Yeah. 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 I'd co-sign that for sure. It's super valuable tool. And again, like you said, especially for like the initial setup of stuff, like when I'm, first setting up bibs and like I'm actually placing branches, I've always got the solar meter there, just like checking, okay, like where, because I'm trying to create those ideal, perches basically for them to get everything they need. And it's really helpful to have that.
Oh yeah.
It's
So
perfect for that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
speaking of branches, like, because I remember you were saying a little bit earlier, because they're almost chameleon-like with the way
Yeah.
they grip everything. Now, are you aiming for certain diameters for these branches, or are you just kind of like,
Yeah.
all right, put these big old sticks in there, or what and whatnot?
That's a really good question. Typically, I aim for a diameter similar in size to their body diameter, if that makes sense, or maybe a little bit larger. But I also provide actually like a pretty broad range. So I'm fortunate in that the land where I live, we have a lot of manzanita here, and I'm often pruning it and removing dead manzanita for fire
Awesome.
mitigation. And so I have like an abundance of manzanita branches, and I've actually
That's
sent
awesome.
boxes to friends and stuff like that at times in the past, just because I have so much of it. And that's a super really great rot resistant wood, and it's super spindly, branchy structure, and so it's great for the bleakers. They seem to do great with that, and yeah, I mean, oftentimes they'll be hanging out on like I said, a branch kind of similar in size to their body diameter, but sometimes they're just like actually like they'll have like their front, you know, claws grasping a little twig and their back claws grasping a twig and their body's just like hanging there in the air, and um they're pretty funny sometimes in the way that they'll posture. Sometimes I actually they also have a semi-prehensile tail, and I've seen them just hanging by their tail occasionally from a branch. They'll use all kinds of weird stuff, especially like when the females are gravid. They're trying to relieve pressure on their abdomen, and so they'll get in all kinds of weird body positions to try and relieve that. So yeah, I try to offer just a diversity of options in that regard.
Yeah, I try to do the same thing. Like, so I have stropheres, right? And I
Yeah,
just remember listening to a podcast with like Joe Hupp, and he was saying like give them different diameters because they can work on their grip strength. Um,
yeah, totally.
yeah, and so I was wondering, it's like, all right, is it kind of the same thing where they have to work on their grip strength with them? So, and because I know they're predominantly they're claws, and they don't have like the sticky stuff like some of the Anoles would, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, they do have pretty cool I've actually tried to take up like some macro photos of their claws. They're pretty cool, interesting shape, and they're really good at climbing, and they can grip that. I have like the universal rocks. I use like they call them the flat sheets on the background. So it's pretty flat. There's not a lot, it's not like the ledge structure, but they can climb right up that no problem at all. And so they can get some pretty impressive grip from those little tiny claws.
Okay.
Honestly, it's really similar. In that respect, they're really similar to tree monitors, like
Okay.
similar claw structure and ability to climb.
Mm.
So they just got a little bit of this, a little bit of that, put it all together.
They're seriously, I've honestly described them before. I'm like, if you took like a tree monitor and a chameleon and an anole and you like blended them together, you got a polychrus. They kind of got a little bit of everything. They're very weird
Yeah.
lizards and very very cool. Obviously,
Now,
I'm
do you
I'm
have
hopelessly
the
biased, but
now do so being that they have the individual eyes, right?
Mhm.
Do you have those same kind of worries as you would with the chameleon?
What do you mean? How do you mean?
Well, because you know how some chameleons have like they have like you have to do certain different kind of vitamins for them for their eyes.
Oh, right, right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or like when they have to flush out their eyes and stuff like that.
I've
Have
never
you
had
noticed
any
any of
issues
that?
like that. No,
Okay.
nothing like that with them. So I use a kind of rotation of supplements for them. The kind of
Yeah.
or I use Arcadia products primarily, and so I'll give them like Earth Pro on most of their meals, and then
Yeah.
supplemented Calcium Pro MG, and then occasionally I'll do the Revitalize, the added D3 one as well,
Yeah.
especially for the females when they're gravid, because they really put a lot into their eggs. They'll lay a clutch. They only lay one clutch a year. Is an interesting thing about them, and so they're not producing multiple clutches. It's just once a year, but they're producing like on average 6 or 8 um,
Okay.
eggs that are about the size of an almond or so. And
Okay.
so that's a pretty big egg for such a small lizard, and so I try to really make sure the females have good nutrition and supplementation around that.
Okay. So, with speaking of breeding, let's kind of get into that
Hmm.
stuff.
Yeah.
Now, prior to actually breeding, now are you doing like, do they do a brumation or cool down or anything like that?
So no, I didn't do any sort of cooling with them, because where they're from, it's like it's basically on the equator. So there's
Okay.
there's no change in photo period. It's basically 12-12.
Wow.
And
Okay.
like year round, it's like nice and warm pretty much. But the major thing that does change is precipitation. And so, you
Okay.
know, right around there they get the wet season, dry season, right? And so what I've done is I have kind of done 3 month cycles. So I'll do 3 months on, 3 months off with the misting schedule that I do. Every day they're still getting misted, but basically when I'm doing the quote unquote wet season, for that 3 months they get misted more frequently. And usually for shorter durations of time, just so I'm not like saturating the viv. I'll do like, you know, in the dry season, say I'll do like a 1 minute misting in the morning, like right after lights on, and then 1 minute at night right after lights off. And then in the quote unquote wet season, I'll add in like a bunch of 20-second cycles throughout the day on top of those two longer sessions. And then the other thing I've done is alongside that, I'll feed them more, because I think that that's another thing that happens. You know, with more water, there's more vegetation, there's more food, there's more just more general abundance, right? And so I think that in a lot of ways, the trigger to breed for those equatorial species is less the actual precipitation, and it's more what the precipitation does, which is it
Okay.
creates abundance, right? And they're like, okay, times are good, it's time to make some babies, and that times out well too with their incubation timing, which I'll mention in a second. But so I'll go from feeding them. They have a pretty slow metabolism, like I said, as a passive feeding strategist. I feed them 2 or 3 times a week on average. But then when I'm trying to breed them, I'm feeding them every day or every other day, you know, or
Wow.
like 4 days in a row, and then I'll skip a couple days, that kind of thing. I try to do a little bit of chaos in that, but more food, typically smaller meals, you know, because I'm not trying to get them fat, you know, or anything like that. That's not going to help them, but just more frequent food. That has seemed to work pretty well in terms of triggering them to breed. They've gone right to it. Every time I've tried, I've been successful breeding them. Um, a couple of years back, I went through a move, and that really set back my animals. Like it just messed up their cycles and their schedules. And so I've had to kind of rebuild routine, and I've also just been like kind of giving them a break. But I'm hoping that 2025 this year, I'm going to be able to produce more clutches again, because it's been a couple of years now of not breeding them, just getting them back settled and healthy, and also rebuilding my group, because a couple of my first animals had passed away, and so I got like some more wild caught stock in, and I'm kind of rebuilding. So hopefully this will be the year. But that's the approach I've taken, and interestingly, they take a long time to lay their eggs. So, you know, the females will get noticeably gravid, and it just feels like they're taking forever, you know, and eventually they just dig a little nest and they lay their eggs. And then the incubation is pretty long. So the first clutch I got from them, I incubated them at about 78 degrees, and I did a night drop to like 76 or so. And those eggs took 160 days to hatch.
It's like
And
monitor territory.
yeah. Well, it gets crazier too. I'll tell you about the Peruvianis
Oh
in a
shit.
second. But the next time I got eggs, I bumped up the temperatures to more like 80 to a drop of 78, and that put them more in the 120 to 140 range, and that's what I've kept them at. And I also had better hatch rate at that.
Okay.
I got like a 50% hatch rate the first clutch, and then 100% every subsequent clutch with that
Okay.
slightly higher temperature. And I've also noticed that the females, when they've nested, they've chosen that temperature right around 80, 79, 80 degrees to nest. That's where they want to nest. And so to achieve that in these tall vivaria, right, where like the bottom floor, they actually descend to the ground in the wild to nest. It's the only time they come to the ground, really. But you know, in a viv, I can't get 80 degrees on the ground floor with overhead lighting unless I'm like just cooking the whole thing, right? So
Yeah.
what I did is I got these planters. Universal Rocks makes these planters basically that you can mount, and I mounted them to the back walls. And they've got live plants coming at them, but they're filled with substrate, and the females go up into those to lay their eggs, and they dig a nest in those. So it's like an elevated nesting platform basically, and it's worked perfectly so far. Once I did that every single time, across both species, the females have chosen that to lay their eggs. And it's cool, it's cool to see that. The babies are pretty easy, right out of the eggs. They immediately go into this weird shed where it looks like they're covered in dandruff. They're just flaking off all these weird little
Oh
white
shit.
scales. It's like really right out of the egg. They look like that. It's kind of like, what's going on with these things? But I think it's just that they have like a strange shed right as they get out of the egg, and then I feed them little tiny pinhead crickets and buffalo beetle mealworms. So the little tiny mealworms. They'll take those, bean beetles, small waxworms, all that stuff, and they take right off, start growing, and haven't had any issues with the babies. Yeah. And I was
gonna
going to say,
say,
with
so
the
have you?
Peruvianas, or go ahead.
Oh, all right, yeah. I was gonna say, have you noticed any? Was there any differences between like when you did those two attempts?
Yeah.
Have you noticed? Was there any differences like in size or anything like that?
Not in the babies. They were the same.
Okay, same
Pretty much the
size.
same
Okay,
size. They seem same vigor, same health, all that stuff. So that
okay,
didn't seem to change anything, thankfully. Yeah, I was curious about that too, because I think that maybe it's one of those enduring myths in herpetoculture. I'm not actually sure if anyone's done the work to study that, but you always hear like, do lower temperatures and you'll have longer incubation, but you'll have bigger babies, healthier babies.
yeah.
And I'm not positive if that's actually true. I think they might honestly be kind of the same. I don't really know, because I think it's just speeding up the metabolic rate, maybe, to have it
Yeah.
warmer. But anyway, I haven't noticed a difference with those. But the crazy thing is with the Peruvianas, they can take like 300 days to
Oh,
hatch.
that's like chameleon range. Damn.
Yeah, it's really intense. And they also have to go. The people that have been most successful hatching them have put them through like a dry period where
Okay.
they start the eggs moist, and then they move them to dry substrate for like 40 days, and then they move them back to wet substrate. And something about
Wow.
that going into the dry substrate like triggers egg development, which that seems backwards to me. I would think that it's more the wet that would trigger it, but I don't know how it all works. But I actually have a clutch of those, my first fertile clutch of those right now, and I think I'm like 90 something days in or something, and I'm just
Oh
like,
man, you got a
most
wow.
with most species, it's like you're like, oh, they're gonna be hatching soon, and
Yeah.
that. But
You're like, oh,
this, I'm just like,
I'm a quarter of the way there.
yeah, exactly. I'm just like, honestly, I'm kind of trying to forget about them because otherwise I'll just be
Yeah.
stressed out. But so far so good with those.
Man,
But
that's awesome.
it's a
Congratulations, dude. That's
long
cool.
time. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And we'll see how it goes. Like, it's a long time for things to go south, but um, it'd be really cool to hatch those because those guys are still really rare in the country, and I'd love to
Yeah.
get more of them out
Like
there.
I only know what now you and I know like Phil Trimper. That's like the only
Yep.
two I know. No.
Yeah, there's one
Yeah.
other gentleman that has a pair, and Phil actually he hatched them successfully for the first time in the U.S.
Okay.
Last year. So and he's been working with them for a while. I think he's probably had his group for at least 5 years, and he had
Wow.
clutches before that didn't make it. And so huge props to Phil for achieving that. There are several people who have done it in Europe. That's actually where my animals came from. They're captive bred from actually a zoo in the UK. But then there's people in Germany have done it, and Czech Republic. But they're still really really rare in the US, which is a bummer because they're actually the interesting thing about the Peruvianas is in terms of their husbandry, they're more forgiving than Marmoratus. They have a wider latitude in terms of their habitat. I think that they come from kind of more tropical dry forest and even kind of more montane environments, and so they tolerate the lower humidity better than Marmoratus do. They're just hardier, basically, except for that incubation.
Yeah.
But
So
I got a question that's a little,
yeah,
I don't want to say in right field, but it's a pretty popular topic, I guess, for conversation. Why do you think it is that some of these UK or European breeders in general are having so much more success with some of these harder species than people in the US? It seems like everybody I speak to that there's something complicated to work with, someone in Europe is successfully already doing it. What do you think gives them the edge?
It's a really good question. And, I've thought about this a lot. We've actually talked about this a little bit on Project Herpetoculture, the
Really?
podcast
Okay,
I've
sick. Okay.
co-hosted, and we've had some European guests on and actually picked their brains about it. And a lot of them will say like, "Oh, it's the same." Like you're seeing through rose-colored glasses because you're actually just seeing the best of what we're doing over here. But there's still, plenty of people that are, doing things really poorly in the UK or in Germany or whatever. But I do think it's true that for one, I think that there's maybe more emphasis on diversity in Europe than there is in the US and on obscurity. Like there's a lot of people working with kind of just more oddball,
Yeah.
weird stuff. That seems to have more of a foothold there. There's also more of a tradition of naturalistic keeping in Europe at this point. I mean, obviously, like you've got people like Philippe de Vaugelis, right, who's like the godfather of U.S. herpetoculture, and he's always, advocated for naturalistic keeping. But U.S. I think the U.S. is really good at systematizing things, and in doing that, there's a lot of subtraction that happens. It's about streamlining and optimizing, and when you're doing all that subtraction, you can reduce complexity to the point that actually it becomes, I think, detrimental to some of these species that need more nuance and complexity, right? And I think that's where maybe the European keepers that at least specialize in that naturalistic style really thrive, is that they're really good at creating complex systems, and they're less optimized. Typically, the collection size is smaller. I think it's more common for people to have, like, honestly, kind of similar to what I'm doing, where it's like I have a trio of this and a pair of that, and I don't have a big facility. I've just got a room in my house or a couple rooms, and they're crushing it with just those things because they have more time and focus to dedicate to fewer animals.
More
maybe.
time to focus on less. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that it's actually kind of funny. Like we were talking before we started going live here about this kind of phenomenon of being, a mile wide and an inch deep, which I think is kind of common in the US. We've got a lot of us are just juggling a lot of different things, myself included. And I think that, at least in herpetoculture, what I'm striving to do, and at least in a lot of my life, I'm trying to get a little bit deeper, a little bit narrower maybe in focus, but a little bit deeper in focus too. And it's just trade-offs. It's like there's advantages to both ways, of course. And I think that really it's about, as keepers, as those of us who are doing this thing, figuring out where we thrive best and what keeps us most motivated. And what I found is that for myself, I'm way more motivated and like invested and excited about keeping when I'm actually doing it at a smaller scale, but I'm like more focused and more dedicated to like individual animals than when I'm broadening it out.
Yeah,
Well, I
like
think
a
when it
much
comes
more
to the
quality
topic,
of life.
I hate
Yeah.
to compete or make it competitive with the US and the UK. If the
Uh-huh.
topic does anything for us in the US, I hope that it at least makes us think, right? Or gives us
Yeah.
something to gauge our thoughts around. Like, do we need the masses, or are we better off having more success with less, right? Like if it's not who's doing better, who's doing more, but again, simply something for us to think about and compare and contrast. And I agree. I feel that the reason some of these guys have much more success with certain things than people in the US have is not because
Mhm.
they're focusing on individual specific projects with very very calculated. They're
Yeah.
focusing more on a specific thing, I guess, than a lot of different things. And it's again, it's something I could go on and on and on about. I think that it's just an interesting topic to at least think about, with everybody. Are you having as
Yeah.
much fun? Are you getting all the joy and pleasure out of this that you can by having a lot of animals, or is it really just one species that you really really have passion for? And
Right.
I mean, take that to the fullest. What do they call, like, biotopes or something, where you use all the
Yeah.
native plants and everything? Like
Yep.
that. I love that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. That's what got me into reptiles. Back in the
Yeah.
day as a kid, you want I get to, like, if I had a stuffed animal or whatever I had, I would take a chunk of that area and I would bring it into my house. I got to take a chunk of
Yep.
the rainforest and put it in an enclosure. Or, I think that's, well, to me personally, and I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of joy in that. There's,
Oh yeah.
it's a super rewarding experience. I mean, when you get to take an animal from an area and it's having babies laid under plants that literally come from the same chunk of rainforest that the lizard comes from,
Yeah.
and and I think that again, I'm trying not to like offend anybody, because I'm not trying to be offensive to anybody or
No,
anything, anyone that
I
keeps
don't think
anything
it's
away. I
I don't
just
think
think
it's
it's a
offensive
lot
at
more
all.
rewarding, when you can keep an animal in its almost natural environment behind glass or in a cage. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, then you see their natural behaviors with it. So, and
absolutely,
Totally.
yeah,
That's what it's all about for me. So
absolutely.
everything I keep is in a biotope setup.
yeah,
That's the only thing I have. Even my babies. So like right here, you can see those are all my baby condos. Those are all little biotopes,
You're
and
going to get the most natural reactions and behaviors out of those animals. Next best thing is the
exactly,
wild, right? It's the best you're going to get
totally.
compared to the wild.
And for me, that's really, again, that's what motivates me is seeing behavior and novelty in that regard.
Awesome.
And I think that, again, it's not to demonize one way or another, but it is,
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, I think it's good to ask ourselves as keepers the
Yes.
question, where do we thrive most? And the reality is, like, I've actually tried in certain times to kind of have higher numbers of animals and see how that goes. And actually, like, I get stressed out. I don't enjoy it. And so it becomes like pretty obvious to me pretty quickly, like, oh, I'm overextended. I need to downsize and just focus a little bit in a little bit more. But I think that we could do a better job as a community in celebrating all the different levels and different styles, and I totally celebrate what Phil's doing, Phil Leitz, from Airheads Only, what he's doing with Euromastics and Chuckwallas and Xenogama, like, and he has created systems that are still providing really high welfare to his animals, and he keeps way more animals than I would ever want to keep. Like, if I kept as many animals as Phil, I would hate it. But he's doing great, and he loves it, and he's fired up and engaged. So it's like, hell yeah, he's doing his thing. I'm doing
yeah,
my thing, and like my niche in a weird way is like I really like working with weird stuff, figuring out how to take care of it, figuring out how to reproduce it, and then trying to get those offspring into the hands of people that can do it better than me. Can take it to the next level, because I'm never going to be the guy producing big numbers of things, but I'm really, my niche is I'm good at figuring things out and breeding them and getting that first step, the groundwork
Awesome.
kind of laid. And I'm okay with that at this point. I'm okay just being that's what I've got to contribute to the field, and I think it's valuable. And there are people that agree with that, and that are down to support what I'm doing, and thankfully, are willing to buy the weird lizards and snakes that I produce each year. And I think that many of them are, like I said, are going to take it to the next level because they're going to be able to produce in bigger numbers.
I mean, you
And
set a great,
yeah,
example, dude. I mean, from how I see it, I mean, you're like the paragon of keeper, right? Like, that's what we should all aim for, is to keep our animals in the most natural environments possible. Like, I mean, it's dumbfounding to me that animals have evolved over millions of years, right? To
oh
very
yeah,
specific, unique environments, to do
yeah,
very unique, specific things in those environments. It should
yeah.
be our objective, right? And again, I'm not judging anybody that pumps out numbers that just has,
Hmm.
500 snakes and 500 bins that all look the same. But I'd imagine that if some of those people could see their snakes in their natural environment doing what the snake evolved to do, you might find more joy in it than you do just looking at it in a draw.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
you set a
totally,
great example
totally.
with your platform, with how you're doing it, the biotopes, dude. Like, that's
Thanks,
amazing.
man.
That's very
Appreciate it.
inspiring. Very, very, very inspiring. You're working with what you like, not what the industry likes, not what's selling, not what's popular. You're doing what makes you happy. And
Yeah,
it's super inspiring, man. Awesome.
thank you. I really appreciate that, man. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's super for me. It's like I mean, I've honestly had moments where like I've like shed a tear seeing my animals do something that that was like, whoa, you know, like that. Like the first time I saw those lizards eating those berries, it was like, for me, that is like, this is what it's all about, you know. And I've shared this story a bunch of times with like my spilotes, my big Amazon puffing snakes, that the first time I put bromeliads in the vivarium with them, my two wild caught females immediately came out and they started going to all the bromeliads and drinking out of them. And it was like this light bulb moment where I'm like, holy shit, you know, like, yeah, this is a canopy species. It's like, where is it getting its water? It's getting its water drinking out of the axils of these amazing, beautiful bromeliads up in the trees. And they knew exactly what they were doing.
Would you rather see that? To me, that's so much cooler than watching them drink out of like a bowl. Get to watch them drink out
Yeah.
of a like that's fucking
It was
awesome.
honestly moving. It was moving to see it. For the first time I was like, holy crap. And also there's like a little tinge in there too of like, wow, when I was actually depriving them of this before I knew to give them that, you know, like their quality of life is actually better now that I know, you know, but
Especially
again,
being like a
you don't know, you
wild
don't
thing.
know.
You know, I know it
Yeah,
sounds a little
exactly.
sappy and stuff, but imagine that.
Yeah.
Imagine, you know, we've all walked through a rain, you know, maybe not a rainforest, but a forest of sorts, and we've looked around. Imagine growing up in that, and that's your environment, and then
Oh
someone
yeah.
takes you and sticks you in a box. Like you're never gonna see
Yeah,
that again. You're never gonna feel leaves under your feet. You're never gonna touch bark on a tree
totally.
again. Like that's friggin' depressing. You
Yeah.
know, maybe animals don't think the same way we do or feel the same way that we do, but they think and they feel. I promise you that.
Oh, for
Oh, and
sure.
it's kind of messed up,
Yeah.
man. I wouldn't. I don't
Yeah.
know, man. You know, it's, at least you recognized it, you addressed it, you take care of it, you do it. I mean,
Yeah,
you know, in that sense, like the animal's safer. You know, you live in your same natural
for sure.
environment with none of the threats. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
all
when you're
about,
moving when you're actually moving these animals, now are you
yeah.
kind of almost background checking these people and making sure that it's going to the right person?
A little bit. I do a little bit of vetting, you know,
shoot,
Yeah.
and it's honestly this is the hardest that's the hardest part of herpetoculture for me as someone
Yeah.
who does produce animals. You know, like I honestly wish I didn't have to do that at all, but I actually
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to participate in herpetoculture without breeding because that's what actually pays for it for me. You know, it's like because I don't make a lot of money in my day job, you know, like I live below the poverty line most of the time. But you know, I can keep my animals at a high standard because I'm able to produce them and then sell the offspring, and I pretty much break even. I think honestly doing that because
Yeah.
I provide pretty high standards. So even if I am producing animals that are pretty valuable, it costs a lot to take care of them, right? And so I do try to check in with people. And the other thing I do is you know, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I've written articles on everything. So pretty much everything that I've kept in that I'm keeping and breeding I take the time to write really thorough husbandry information on and like make sure that the person who's buying from me has access to that and because it's like I'm not trying to hide anything. I don't have any secrets. You know, I'm not trying to like hide my methods or anything like that. It's like I want people to be successful, and I'm also pretty hands on in terms of like you know if you buy a snake or a lizard from me, like when you open the box, you're gonna find my card. It's got my personal cell phone number on it, and I'm like really clear with people. Like if you have any questions or any issues or anything, call me, text me, send me an Instagram message, whatever, and I'm happy to help. You know, and try and troubleshoot things, um, and so it's a tricky thing because it's like I don't want to be too like overbearing, and I also don't want to be like a gatekeeper in the sense of like I don't want to like be like, oh, you're not ready for this. You know, like I don't want
Yeah.
to tell somebody else that they're not ready because honestly people gave me opportunities to work with rare weird shit when I was like a teenager and I did well with it because I was committed, you know, and focused and that's the most important thing, right? Is like you don't necessarily need to have a lot of experience so much as you need to have a lot of like attention to detail and commitment to learn, right? And observe your animals and respond to what they're telling. And so it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing to balance, but I do tend to ask people questions, you know, or at least like look at their page, you know, if they're messaging on Instagram, I'll check out what they're doing. Okay, yeah, this person looks like they're doing an awesome job with their animals. It sounds like they're a really good fit. And yeah, so it's kind of a tricky balance for sure, And
We
one
owe
thing
it
that
to
I've
the
been kind of
animals.
talking, totally, totally, you would say animals to make sure that they're ending up somewhere good. And something that I've been thinking about trying to do is starting to create like almost like cohorts of like each clutch that I produce, all the people that buy them. I've been thinking about offering like Q&A sessions or something, like
Yeah,
on
okay.
Zoom or something, where everybody who bought
Oh,
from
cool.
that clutch, we could all come together, and I could hear from everybody, like what's going on, what's your experience so far,
Very cool.
what issues is everyone having, and that way also there's like everyone there, like having like their shared knowledge, because sometimes people they'll send something to it'll be like it went off feed for a while I was transitioning and settling in, but then I got it to eat feeding on this, and it's like not what I was feeding it, or something like that. And so it can be helpful to have feedback from the actual people who are buying stuff as well. But that's something I've been toying with. I haven't actually implemented it yet, but I think that it's something I want to try. Also, just a cool way to create more community and stuff
More
around it all.
engagement, and yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, keep up that communication with everybody. I love it when people send me updates on like if I sold them something.
Oh
Hell,
yeah.
I've told people I won't sell them something when they like they totally do the opposite of what I like say. All right, this is how you're supposed to set them up. Especially
Yeah.
having something new that you never even you had before. It's like, hey, this is how you need to set them up, and they're like, all right, is this right? No, it's not right. I was like,
Yeah.
get it right first, and then like
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and sell you this gecko. I'll give you your money back. Like if
Yeah.
you're gonna just not listen, you're gonna go do the total opposite thing. Because I was like,
Totally.
there's not a lot of these geckos here. I want to make sure they thrive and we can have more. And if you're gonna do
Exactly.
the opposite, might kill them. I was like, we can't. I just
Yeah.
can't do it. You know?
Totally. It's again, it's one of those parts of the hobby too where it's like it's one of the places where I feel the most conflicted again, because it's like I can't control what the person ends up doing
Yeah,
at the
exactly.
end of the day.
It's a fine
Like
line.
I can give them as much information as I can. I can give them as much advice and insight, and they can tell me all the right things and then still go do something different.
Oh yeah,
And I've had that happen a couple of times, with
yeah,
certain things that I've sold, and it's like, oh, like that's not what we talked about at all, and that's a bummer. And I know that that's a really common problem. I mean, we talked about Justin earlier. Like he posted recently about some of the cool Sri Lankan iguanas that he works with, like the Ceratophoria. He produced like thousands of them a couple of years ago. He was just cranking them out, and like he's like, where are they? Like,
yeah,
so many people bought these animals from me and not around anymore. So it's really it's a really challenging thing for sure to figure
yeah.
out who's going to do well with certain things, and to find that balance between giving people a chance and also being a responsible breeder, which is vetting is part of that.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna use the restroom real quick. You guys keep talking.
Yeah, go for it. Sounds good.
Have you ever sold any of these lizards to anyone and had them go and sell them again? Like, have you lost track of them? Like, say you sold them to Joe Schmo and then Joe went and sold them to somebody?
I haven't sold a lot of the Polychrus actually, and not really. I think I've had someone actually, I bought one back from somebody.
Okay, that's where I was going to
Or
go with it.
actually, two different times actually that I've had that happen, where I've ended up
Really?
not buying them back, and then subsequently sold those to somebody else. So I've had that happen a couple times, but I haven't seen like them pop up on Morph Market or anything like
Oh,
that,
really?
so far. But again,
That's a good
I've
thing.
only produced a few clutches, and
Mm.
I've only let a few go here and there, and so it's been rare. But typically, I tell people too, like, if you ever do want to move these along, like, let me know, because I
Yeah.
might want to just get them back from you. And
At least if
because
you're
again,
a
I want the
hub, you can
animals to succeed. Yeah,
find someone else, or you'll know someone else that can take them and kind of like arrange it to
totally.
happen. I think there's
Yeah.
there's people. I mean, I know a few bearded dragon breeders, believe it or not, that do that a lot. Like, if you ever get rid of the animal, like you have to run them by me. Like, you have to offer it to me first, type of thing. It's I don't know how well it works for them, but I always hear them rambling on about it, which I
Yeah.
respect. I don't sell my animals. I would
Hmm.
give them away before I sold them, and I would
Yeah.
give them to someone that I would feel comfortable with. And I almost feel like I get weird with it because, you know, a lot of my like chihuahuas and lychees I've raised since they were all of them, really, not even some, all of them, since they were
Yeah,
hatchlings. Like I have such a bond with them and so much history, 4+ years of history with
totally.
these things. I am obligated to look after their children, if you will, right? Like I
Yeah,
cannot
yeah,
just take them and sell them. I mean, this is not like slavery. I'm not selling off your offspring.
yeah,
Like this is
yeah,
terrible. Like if I felt
yeah,
that someone really wanted them and someone was worthy of having one and you could do better than I'm doing or at least as good as and give these things greater life, then I'm gonna give it to you, you know, as a gift. And
yeah,
I don't suggest everybody does that because it's not financially
yeah,
rewarding.
yeah,
But for my animal's sake, it's comforting, I guess, you know, to say the least. You know,
for sure.
it's terrible. I ask myself these questions all the time when I go to shows, you know, and I'll look at all these animals on the table and I'm like, damn, like they probably raised that thing's parents for I don't know how many years. And then they just put these babies out on the table for anyone to come by. Like,
Hmm.
where do these things go? With all the ball pythons that are bred every year, right? Like,
Yeah,
where do they all go? Like, what
yeah,
happens? Do the breeders even care? You know, these are questions I ask myself. Like, does anybody care? Does anybody know? Like, how come there's 5 million sold a year, but I only know 4 people that have them? Like, where the hell are they
yeah,
going? What's happening to them?
yeah. I have a feeling that a lot of us wouldn't like the answers to those questions,
I know. I'm
unfortunately.
sure I.
Oh
And
no, they wouldn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's that's a rough side of things, you know, and it's also, I mean, in some ways, you know, because of the species I'm keeping, and pretty much everything that I have is weird
Yeah.
and obscure, and that in and of itself, there's a barrier to entry for even knowing what it is, let
Yeah.
alone having interest in keeping it. And that on some level is intentional for me, just because
Oh yeah.
um,
You
mostly, yeah,
alleviate
most of the
thousands of
people
problems.
that, yeah, exactly. It alleviates a lot of the issues because typically when people are inquiring to keep stuff from me, it's like they already know what it is. They're already doing things. They've already thought about it a while. You know, like we talked about earlier. You know, Jason mentioned in the chat that I'm sending him a pair on Wednesday. I'm going to be shipping out uh, my last pair of Plecris that I'll be moving for a while, at least until I produce them again. And you know, like he first messaged me about him months ago. You know, it was the first time we talked about him, and I sent him my article, and so I know he's been thinking about him. You know, and like that's really comforting to me to know that he's thought it through, and I
Mm-hmm.
trust that he's going to do great with them, just based on his skill set too, with what he's doing
That's
with
how
his other
it
stuff.
should
But
be. You know, I mean, a buddy
yeah,
of
that's
mine.
I love it when it's like that.
Yeah, a buddy of Jason and ours, my buddy Matt, always you know, and I should have thought about this years ago, but a lot of people go to reptile show and impulse buy stuff, right? And those animals I
Hmm.
feel like typically have, you know, not such a good outcome in the end, I guess. Some I'm sure survive and make it fine and people love them, but a lot of times people that impulse buy things just impulsively dump them too. So
Yeah,
Matt had brought it up one
yeah,
day and he was like, you know, if you ever had questions about a species and you wanted a species, buy a book. Buy a book about it, read about it.
yeah,
You may find by the time you're done reading that book that you don't want that animal anymore. You may have
totally.
all the you know, you may get all of the joy or lack of or all the experience from that species that you thought you were going to have just from reading the book. You may read the book, read
Hmm.
about the behaviors, read about the requirements, everything about him, and realize that it's just not for you. You don't have
Yep,
to jeopardize an animal at that cost. You got a book, and if you never read it again, you put it on your shelf, and you have something to go to for a resource. It's
totally.
it's a brilliant method, you know, and
It is.
people
I do the
should.
same thing honestly with like plants for the vivs and stuff like that. You know, it's like if I'm like feeling like I'm kind of things feel stale or boring or whatever, which is I mean it never really feels like that, but I mean it you know, there's times when you want something more, you know, and that's like often I think when we're vulnerable to cruising morph market, you know,
It's a
that's how they
dangerous
get us.
place.
and and so sometimes what I'll do is I'll be like, I'm gonna get some cool mood plants for the vids, and I'll find some cool weird plants that I want to try out, and it kind of yeah, like it's it scratches that same itch, you know. And I think that honestly that speaks to like a deeper thing in us with herpetoculture, you know, and with even honestly like with like society where we're at, you know, where we're so primed to consume, you know, and I think that very often what we actually want is a relationship. You know, it's not like like you don't want to go out and buy the thing necessarily. You want like the relationship that is implied by that. So it's like the same as like I think about it almost like food, you know, it's like you know, growing your own tomatoes is a really different thing than going and buying them, you know,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
hunting is a
definitely.
really different thing than going and buying your meat, you know, and the satisfaction
Absolutely.
and like the gravity that you feel from eating meat that you've hunted. I think that that's something that like meets a much deeper longing in us, you know, and I think it's kind of
Yeah,
similar, like that's part of why we keep animals in the way we do is because it meets this deep longing in us somewhere that's hard to
sense of
even
accomplishment.
understand.
And
Yeah,
nurture.
totally.
You know, humans
Yeah,
are
Exactly.
naturally hardwired to take care of things, right? That's like a phase of
Exactly.
life, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
it's just like
Yeah, well said.
like Ant said with like humans, right? Like I feel like there's a sense of accomplishment because like my son, he's in the Air Force now, so I feel
Yeah.
like there's a sense of like I did my job in raising a man. So and
Yeah,
now
man.
he's doing the same thing with his
To
son.
love
Like
his
he's
country
raising
at
his son.
that. Hell
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. That's
you
awesome,
know.
man. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
more about these police. We started getting kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
philosophical on
yeah.
this.
Yeah, yeah.
So we
I
started.
don't let me go there. I'll do
No,
it.
you're good.
So
No,
yeah,
it makes
keep
for
me
a
on the rails
great
here.
it makes for a great conversation. But so like we started kind of getting into the breeding and eggs and everything like that. And
Mhm.
so before I wanted to kind of get on to like what is like the substrate like mix that you're using for them and like
Oh yeah.
how deep of it do you
Hmm.
use?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So I mix all my own substrates. Usually I just get stuff from like the home improvement store, like the big bricks of peat moss and play sand. Sometimes I'll go and get some like decomposed granite from like the landscape supply places, and I
Okay.
mix like kind of like this, just this kind of sandy, loamy mix, you know. And I don't really have specific ratios. I kind of go by
Yeah.
feel, but I'm trying to get something that's got good drainage and good like kind of loft that doesn't compact too much, so that it's easy for them to dig in. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Seems like play sand is really helpful for that because it drains so
I use
well
it
and it
too.
doesn't compact.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great material, and then you can add in, you know, organics like the peat moss to create a little bit more texture and humidity retention and all that stuff. So that's typically what I use. And you know, in the vivs, the substrate layer is probably 8 inches deep in the 4x2 by
There you go.
fours. It's pretty deep.
Yeah.
Um, because part of that too is to provide for the plants exactly, but also I've found that if you're doing a biotope or a bioactive setup, the efficiency of it really relates to the volume of soil you have. So like for example, like I've got these Amazon puffing snakes, the spilotes that I mentioned. These are these huge, big colubrids. They produce a lot of waste. And a lot of people would say, like, oh, it's impossible to keep something like that in a bioactive setup. I found that that's not true, but you do need to have a lot of soil, you know, because the soil is the engine that's metabolizing that waste, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, it's not going to work if you got 4 inches of soil, but if you got 12 inches of soil, you can do it, because basically you got a big old compost heap, you know,
Yeah. There you go.
running in
Yeah.
your viv. And so that's kind of a similar thing. Obviously, with the polychris, it's not as essential because they're producing this, you know, much smaller waste. It's not a big deal. But I have found that, you know, they will dig in it when they're nesting. Those planters that I talked about, those have at least 6 inches of soil in them.
Okay.
And the females will typically they'll dig all the way to the bottom, and
Really?
the eggs will be, you know, and down at the lowest point they can get. I have had one female lay eggs in a really shallow nest, but it was because she couldn't dig anymore because the planter was so full of roots and everything that she was just
Oh,
kind of
okay.
digging into this massive roots, and she couldn't really get any deeper, and she just laid her eggs right there pretty shallow. But you know, and they will cover their eggs and they'll pat it down, you know, with their heads like the Anoles do. It's really cool to see that. But
And in theory, they could make it out, right? I mean, if you didn't pull them out, I
oh
mean, that
yeah,
seems so deep, you know, but sure, why
yeah,
not, right? They would
I
dig
mean,
out
they
that
do it in the
far.
wild, so why wouldn't
Yeah.
oh yeah,
you would think why wouldn't they make it out? But there might be like a little mortality rate with that one, just maybe slight vary,
right,
but no,
yeah.
no,
I
that's
think
where
that yeah,
humans kind of intervene and
Interesting.
we like, all right, grab them up, make sure everybody's gonna hatch correctly.
right, exactly. I've thought about leaving the eggs to just let them incubate, but it's like like with like the Peruvianus, it's like
Not yet. Get a couple
not
more
yet.
months,
I'm not brave yet. It's like I'm just not that brave, especially because of there's microfauna. There's stuff like ice bogs.
Oh yeah,
They love
yeah, yeah.
calcium. They'll eat the eggs. So if I didn't have to worry about stuff like that, I probably would try it honestly with some of my stuff. But
any
I don't want
paternal
to like
type
waste
of
them.
instincts? Have you watched? Is there parents around the young at all? Have you seen them do anything?
I've never kept the babies in with the adults. I think that they might eat them, but honestly, they probably wouldn't. Honestly, I've kept, obviously the males are so much smaller than the females that if the females wanted to kill the
Probably.
males, they probably
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
Um, but I've never tried keeping the babies with the adults. It's an interesting thing to potentially try at some point down the road, but I always have just been a bit cautious about it. And because they don't produce a lot of babies, I'm hatching like one clutch a year from each female. I'm
Yeah.
pretty precious with the babies and don't want to lose
Definitely
one
not worth
potentially.
gambling. Yeah. No.
Yeah, exactly. But those kinds of things are interesting. I mean, it'd be interesting to figure it out. And I know that they Polychrus will be found. They're typically not going to be like right next to each other, but they'll be inhabiting like the same bush or like the same tree a lot in the wild. They'll be like a whole group of them that'll live across this one bush or one tree or one shrub, and so they're definitely around each other
That's what
for
has me
sure.
thinking, because naturally, if they're
Yeah,
digging out of the ground, they're an arboreal species. They're coming out of the ground and going straight up. The odds of them
exactly.
being
Yep,
in a tree with an adult or maybe even their parents is probably pretty
totally.
light, right? Like they probably
Yeah,
wound up in a treetop. So they are either just not interested in eating them or they're
yeah,
kind of accepting them. Just a
yeah,
thought.
yeah.
Curious.
No, it's really that's a great insight, and it's totally true. It's like the female's probably going down and nesting at the base of the tree that she lives in, most likely. That totally makes sense. And it's actually,
Yeah.
when I was first trying to figure out what they needed in terms of nesting, I was like, I don't even know if they nest on the ground. Like, and I actually figured out that they nest on the ground by going on iNaturalist because um, I would see all these emaciated looking females covered in dirt and with their claws all clotted with dirt. And that was what tipped me off that okay, the females go to the ground to
That's
nest because they it's
great
clearly,
observation,
females
man.
that had
See?
just laid eggs. But that's like I mean, stuff like that is such an amazing resource having iNaturalist. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Me and Jay are on
it's
there
the
all the
next
time too. That's how I
it's
learn
so cool.
my animals. I don't look
Totally.
at books about my animals. I study where they come from. Studying
Yeah,
Yeah.
where they come from gives me the answers I need on how to take care of them.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, like I said, there's
Yeah, it's
no
so cool.
real books for like Cerdocdactylus. So
Oh
I'm
yeah.
on iNaturals all the time, looking up like coordinates and everything. Because me and Sav had a conversation about some of that stuff. About
Yeah.
like the Cerdocdactylus. Like, all right, these ones come from Thailand, and some folks are like, hey, you keep them at room temp. I'm like, I've been to Thailand personally, so
Yeah.
room temp. Like, what the hell's room temp to you? Because Thailand's
Yeah.
hot as fuck. Like
Yeah,
I'm sorry, it
totally.
is hot. I've been to Thailand probably about 7, 8 times. No, because I was in the
Yeah.
military, I was in the Navy, so I got to travel a lot.
Yeah.
So I've got some perspective on how they're living. And I mean, I wasn't deep in those forests, so I get it. There might be a little bit of a gradient there, but
Yeah.
yeah, some
But they
folks are like,
grow
no, I don't put no
Yeah.
heat on them or anything. I'm like, there has to be a little bit of heat. There has to be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
definitely, I was looking on there a couple nights ago. I was just looking on iNaturals. It's like, all right, what is it? What is it? All right, boom. Then I pulled the weather app up. What's the temps in
Yep.
there right now at that forest where they found them? So I was like, all
Yep.
right, now I'm starting to everything's starting to that locomotion starting to go in the head of all right, this is how I need to start doing it with them. Uh,
Yeah.
with
I
the
love that stuff.
yeah, man, like like I said, iNaturals is like one of those. I'm not saying it's a game changer, but it helps you so much just
Totally.
for no, just for just a little bit of information that you might not get from someone else's perspective, like another keeper that's in the U.S. No, I want to know
Yep.
how they are in Thailand. I want to know how they are in Indonesia, Malaysia, stuff like that.
Yep.
So
Say it all the time. Nature is our proxy, not the next
yes,
man. Nature.
yeah,
Nature is
Yep.
what we are striving to mimic, to
100%.
copy in our enclosures.
Well
Because
said.
yeah,
that's the greatest tool I feel like we have. When I was a kid, again, we didn't have any of these books back in the 80s. When you got an animal You look at National Geographic, you look at all these
Hmm.
Encyclopedia Britannica, you look at all these books to see where the animal came from, because the most information you'd get about a species is where they come from. So we would study as kids where they came from, and then we'd make these assumptions basically in our head of what they were probably doing, where they probably were, the environment they were, and then we'd copy that. Now a lot of things have changed, but it's still kind of the same method, study where they come from.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Yeah, exactly. Sav's got it.
Yeah.
Facts.
So you because I remember in the beginning you were saying that you kind of put them like the babies like in like one enclosure. Have you noticed any kind of social structure with them with the babies?
I haven't really, I feel like I should be noticing that, and I don't know if it's just because I'm kind of dense and I'm not seeing it, but I haven't really noticed like a whole lot of social behavior or even really competition between them.
Just gonna say
Yeah.
competition.
They seem pretty mellow with each other. I think that maybe once or twice I've noticed that one of them seems like it's maybe getting bullied a little bit, and so I've separated it out and just kept
Mhm.
it on its own for a little while until it's looking strong, and reintroduced it to the others, and the issue's not there anymore. So I think that that's probably just some basic competition happening, but polychrists I think are more subtle than a lot of lizards in terms of their body language and their social behavior. And they're also, I think they're pretty smart. Obviously intelligence is a relative thing, but like I think that they're pretty smart. And like when I'm in the room, I know that they're very aware that I'm there, and they're probably behaving differently than when I'm not there. And so this is like another thing, like I mentioned earlier, I want to try fogging with them. Another thing I'd like to do is to set up some cams so I can see what they're doing when I'm not there, because I bet their behavior is different. And yeah, I mean they're really subtle in all of that regards, but I think that that's kind of, again, that's one of the things I really would love to have more experienced kind of lizard people keeping them so we can kind of compare notes. And I know that there's a lot that I'll be able to learn from other people who keep them and observe them. And I want to hear from other people, like what's your impression of these guys? Do you think that they're better housed solo? Because I think it's totally possible that housing them solo is actually the way to go. And I'm not quite picking up on the subtleties of their competitive cues and all of that stuff. It could totally be that that's the case, but um, it's they're not the kind of lizards that it's like it's really obvious you got to house them solar because they're beating the hell out of each other. Where it is like with some species, that's the case, right? They'll just be attacking each other. These guys are not like that, but they could be doing other more subtle bullying, so to speak, that I'm not picking up on.
Like, so for like you having a group like that, group of babies, what size enclosure are you using for them, and what would be something suitable for just one hatchling?
Yeah. So I use these Tamura Designs condos for all my babies, and I think that I have both the 3 unit condos and then the 4 unit condos. I think the 3 units, the enclosures are like 16 by 18 by 18 roughly,
Okay.
and then in the 4 units they're like 12 by 18 by 18, something like that.
Okay.
And I'll typically keep 4 or 5 babies in one of those little units together for the first couple months, and because they're tiny when they hatch, they're very small, and that seems like plenty of space for them initially. And there's a bunch of little twiggy manzanita branches in there for them to climb on, lots of perching opportunities. And I have them on these racks with Arcadia UV and LEDs, and then they've also got a little nano halogen a hotspot on each of them to provide a hotspot. And so honestly, the gradient in terms of parameters is basically the same as it is in my larger enclosures. It's just a scaled down version of it, and that seems to work well. I think that for like a single baby, typically by the time that I've sold them in the past, they're several months old. I like to get them really well established and just make sure that they're thriving before I move any of them typically. And um, I think that like something like an 18-inch cube is good for a youngster for the first year or so. And you'll want to upgrade them into something bigger. But they're like being a passive, again, feeding strategist. They're not like a hyperactive species at all. You're not going to see them pacing around or glass surfing. I've never seen that with mine at all. So I don't think that it's critical that they have like a huge space, but I do think that at the same time, again, especially if you're cohabiting them, it's good to give them enough space to move around each other comfortably.
How bad would it be if someone was lucky enough, say, to get one from you?
Yeah.
And they were thinking about this for months, so they already have a tank set up, fully planted. It's
Yeah.
cycling, if you will, for a few months, and they're waiting to get one from you. Can you take a baby that you feel is comfortable to send out, of that size? Can they
Yeah.
take one of them and put them right into their forever home that they've been working on, or
Yes.
do they have to stop? They can't.
They can absolutely do that. Yeah. I'm sure they could. I don't think there would be any issue at all. In fact, the first babies that I had when I got those captive hatch babies, they went right into a 4x2x3.
Oh wow.
And they thrived. There's just two babies
Nice.
in there. And it was fully planted and decked out, and they thrived in that. So I'm sure they could do that. And that's a great way to go, honestly. If you have that, space and capacity to do that, then I would say do it. There's definitely not going to be any downsides to it, because again, if you provide the gradient, they'll take care of themselves, right? They'll meet their needs across that gradient as long as they can meet their needs within that space. They'll do it. One thing I wanted to mention that's kind of cool about Polychrus is that, like chameleons, they're not something that's going to utilize hides. Really, they're fully reliant on crypsis for their security. And so, like, I've offered cork tubes and hollowed branches and stuff like that for them to use. They never use them at all. In fact, they completely ignore them. And it's amazing sometimes how well they can blend into just the foliage. Like, there have been times when I've been like I'm like looking, I'm counting, like, okay, there's 3 in this vid. I'm looking for them. And I'm like trying to find, I'm like, where is one? Do you want to get out, or what's going on? And then I look and it's like literally on a branch, like 2 inches from my face, just like hugging a branch. And I just didn't totally overlooked it because they can blend in so well.
Nature makes no
For that
mistake.
reason, exactly. And for that reason, I think that they're awesome as like a display species. Like if it's like, if there's somebody out there that's like, oh, I want a really beautiful planted viv in my office, or like in my living room at home, or my dining room, just as like a display piece in my house, and I want a cool lizard to go in there, it's like Polychrus would be awesome for that, because it's something that you'll be able to see. It's not going to be hiding all the time. They're always out basking on the branches somewhere. And I love, that's one of the things I really love about them, is that they're really easy to observe, because they're not one of those things that's like, burying itself down in the leaf litter. They're diurnal, so they're out during the day. And as someone who's really behavior driven in my animals, I love seeing that.
Very
Nice.
Yeah.
So I know we didn't get it. I was gonna say, because with the eggs, one, are they hard shelled? Because I know you're talking about calcium. Are they pretty hard shelled or leathery? And then also, so when you're incubating them, what kind of medium are you using for this?
Yeah, well, great questions. Great questions. Yeah, so they're not hard shelled, they're leathery, but they've got a really cool texture. They've got like these longitudinal grooves across the eggs. And I don't know what the function of those is, but it's almost like, think of like an almond, how the almonds have like those longitudinal grooves. That's what the eggs look like. They've got this really interesting texture. I haven't seen it before on any other eggs that I can think of off the top of my head.
The embryo matures?
They do. Yeah, the eggs get much bigger.
Stress.
Yeah, it might be, yeah, exactly. It might be allowing for that egg to expand. Yeah, I think that's a great theory. But yeah, they definitely grow a lot over the course of incubation. Typically, the way that I like to incubate them is, and I do this with a lot of the stuff that I incubate, I use the little Redline Science, like kind of sim style containers that are meant to fit into a deli cup.
Okay, that little egg
So
trays.
I take those, exactly, like little egg trays. I take those and I do Pangea hatch, which is like that terracotta clay pebble substrate stuff. I get that nice and wet, get that in the bottom, then I put in the egg tray, put the eggs into the egg tray, and then on top of that, I drape the eggs with some long fiber sphagnum moss that I kind of wring out so that it's moist but not wet. And what I find is that that works really well because the eggs can actually draw the moisture that they need out of that sphagnum moss, but they're never actually just sitting in wet substrate, you
Yeah.
know, and so they still
Okay.
have good airflow underneath them. And it seems to work well because I think about it again, if you're laying them, I'm trying to imagine how they're laying these things in the ground, right? And I think that they're typically laying their eggs in well draining soil, right? Because you don't want your eggs ever be sitting in water. And so the eggs can pull moisture out of the substrate above them easily, but they're never going to be sitting in that wet muck. And so that's what I try to avoid. And I find that those stim containers work really well for that. And that's also what I'm doing with the Peruvianis clutch that's incubating right now in the incubator. The same method, and it seems great. And one thing I'll notice too is like if the eggs ever start to dent or anything like that, you know, I check them on average maybe once a week or so. And if there's ever any denting, I'll just take my mister and I'll just do a couple little sprays onto that little pillow of sphagnum moss on top of them, and then they'll just draw the
Swell right
moisture
up.
that they need. Yeah, they'll draw the moisture they need out of that moss right away and swell right back up. So that's typically what I've done. Incubating, you know, I think is I'm sure there's 1,000 different ways to do it correctly. You know, it's like, you know, Phil's always saying like the eggs are meant to hatch, you know, and they're probably sturdier than we give them credit for, but that's just the method that I've used and have had good success with. So I'm kind of like, all right, I'm just going to keep doing this because it's working. But I'm sure there are other things that would work.
Definitely. So, I know you were talking about, so you've had wild caughts and everything. So, one, what's your protocol for wild caughts? And then after that, like, what are you doing for them as far
Yeah,
as getting them acclimated to captive husbandry?
yeah, that's a really good question too. They're really probably the trickiest part with Footy Chris because again, if people want to try wild caught, you know, they're more experienced lizard keepers. I would say go for it. The critical thing that I've found with wild caughts is actually housing them solo. Um, and so I actually house them all solo in these. I make modified like iris weather tight totes, those latch totes that are the ones
Hmm.
that are like 16 inches tall or 18 inches tall. Um, and I cut out the top of those. I put on a little Arcadia shade dweller and a little nano halogen up there for them to get heat. And I put in some branches, some foliage, usually paper towel substrate, or sometimes cocoa coir or peat moss, something really simple that I can see the droppings, and so I can do fecals and all that stuff. Um, and the first thing is to just really make sure that they're hydrated. And so like when I get in a shipment of Bleakris, if I bought some wild caught, I put them in a bucket and I mist them, like put them in a bucket with a branch kind of at an angle so they can rest on a branch. And I just mist them with kind of lukewarm water, and let them drink really thoroughly. Usually they'll drink a lot when I'm doing that because, you know, obviously shipping and everything's dehydrating. And then I get them in the Viv, and I don't feed them or anything for the first few days. I just let them settle in. I try to keep the quarantine tubs on a misting system of their own, so that they're getting regular misting and they're getting plenty of opportunities to drink. And then I introduce food. And the trickiest thing is figuring out what they want to eat. And that's where it's been really helpful to know that they will go nuts for phasmids and praying mantids, that kind of thing. Because once you can find whatever that they'll eat voluntarily, it's really easy to then employ chain feeding to get them to eat other things. So while they're chomping down a phasmid, I'll put a super worm up on tongs and kind of put it up next to their mouth, and they'll grab it as they're chewing, and then they'll swallow that down. And after a while, they'll realize, okay, these other things are food too, you know, and then they'll accept a broader spectrum of prey. But I think, you know, like, you know, in the wild, they're never seeing a superworm. And so
Yeah.
I don't think that they really recognize that as a food source initially. Um, but I try to keep something novel, like again, like phasmids or mantids on hand if I have wild caughts coming in, to make sure that I can get them started on something voluntarily, and then I can kind of broaden that from there. Grasshoppers are also great. I have a subscription now with Dean at Dragon Hoppers
Nice.
to get grasshoppers from him. And the Peleacris thrive on grasshoppers. They love grasshoppers. So I've been offering those for the last couple of months now. It's been really worth it to have that subscription with him. And also, they really like caterpillars. So silkworms, hornworms are really great for getting them started. And I think that those are also great, again, for wild caught because they're so moisture rich. Again, I think they help with that hydration. So that's kind of my protocol with those. And then I do run fecals, and it's typical. They'll have the basic pinworm and stuff like that. Sometimes I opt not to treat them. If they are thriving, if they're gaining weight without parasite treatment, I leave them alone because I think that it can actually be more harm than good, especially with animals that might have kidney damage or organ damage to some degree from the import process, which is really common with Peleacris. So that's kind of my protocol there. If they do have like a higher parasite load, or if they seem to be struggling, like they're not gaining weight even though they're eating well, then I'll give them Panicure, Flagyl, whatever is needed for that specific parasite load. But usually it's some combination of metronidazole and Panicure. So sometimes other things will get in the mix, but it's less common.
Nice.
And my quarantine process, usually they're in quarantine for a minimum of 3 months, but sometimes it can be longer. It's like, it really depends on how the animal's doing. And, I keep my quarantine separate from my main collection, and, use separate tools, all the standard quarantine protocols, separate tools. I work on quarantine last, servicing the collection and all that stuff. So since they work well, I have lost a few Peleacris in that process. Sometimes they arrive too rough to really get them back from the brink, But the vast majority, I think maybe I've lost 2 or 3 during quarantine, but I've probably acclimated more than a dozen of them at this point, and including acclimating them for other people to then get them so that they have, say they need a male, they have a female or a couple of females, and they need a male to breed. And so I think that's a pretty good success rate for a tropical lizard species, that can be pretty sensitive.
Oh yeah, definitely. So besides working with the wild caught and have those like parasite loads, is there any like other common health issues like people should know about? And then what are some good resources for people to look up for these animals besides your website?
Yeah. In terms of other health issues, I mean, apart from just like the basic stuff like dehydration, I haven't really had any issues. Parasites seems to be the main one. Parasites and dehydration are the really critical things that I've noticed. And that's pretty common. I'm trying to think if anything else has come up, but I haven't noticed anything else. In terms of resources, I would definitely say read my article on my website. It's wellspringherpetoculture.com. Sorry, I should have gotten easier URL than that, but
well, if they really want to know, they'll go.
Show notes.
Yeah, they can find it.
Yeah, I already have it in the show notes, so you're good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so it's there. But I've got a pretty thorough article. It goes over to the acclimation for wild caught in there, because I figure that most of the people reading that are probably going to be, dealing with wild caught. Other than that, I mean, the stuff we've been talking about, iNaturalist, Google Scholar, unfortunately, there's not a lot out there on in terms of care. I think that honestly, that article that I wrote is the only one that I'm aware of about Marmoratus at all. If you go on Facebook, I started a group a while back called the Peleacris Husbandry Working Group. And that actually is a really good resource. If you go in like the files section, I've got a pretty good library there of scholarly articles, that I've dug up on the whole genus. And there's also you can search tags there like breeding or diet and nutrition or housing, and all the posts that are relevant to those subjects will come up. And it's a lot of that group has just been me posting information over the years, but also as more people have kept them, in recent years. Other people have been posting there periodically. It's not the busiest group ever because again, these are still pretty rare, obscure lizards, but the people that are in that group are really eager to help. So like if someone's out there keeping stuff and they want to try things out, definitely or ask questions. That's a good place to do it. The Bleakers has been a really working group, and it's also a cool place to just see what other species are out there because I'm always like posting, like iNaturalist observations, of the other species of Bleakers. I think there's another 7 species on top of the 2 we have in herpetoculture. They're pretty cool, weird lizards. So
Oh, yeah, definitely.
it's a fun place to explore.
All right, we're almost hitting that 2-hour mark. And you got some, you got any questions before closers?
No, I mean, I guess I could ask, and it's kind of an obvious answer, but where do you see the species in the hobby in the future? Do you think that there are species that's always going to stay obscure and for, I don't want to say elite keepers, but those niche keepers, or do you think that they have the potential to become a super mainstream, popular pet? Where do you see the future for these guys?
It's a really good question. I've thought about
Where
that a
would you
lot.
like it?
Honestly, I would like it if they were more common. I don't know if they're ever going to be like mainstream, because I think their care is a little bit too specialized for that. But I think that they could achieve a similar status to something like a panther chameleon. I mean,
Okay.
their care is actually very similar to a panther chameleon, and they've actually got a fair amount of phenotypic diversity. They're pretty variable. And I think with selective breeding and stuff like that, you could probably get some pretty cool phenotypes from them. I'm not sure because it's just too early to know at this
Yeah.
stage, but there are some that are patternless, for example, that I've seen come in. There are some
Really?
that have these really cool yellow dorsal stripes. Sometimes they have white dorsal stripes. And so there's definitely some room to play, so to speak, in terms of like, line breeding for traits, phenotypic traits. That's never been like something that really interests me, but for people that are into that kind of thing, and I think of, again, like panther chameleons is a great example of a species where it really expanded the phenotypic diversity just by breeding localities and selected traits and all that stuff. So I think that they could achieve a similar status to that if they got focus from similar minded keepers. And again, like I want to talk to more folks in the chameleon community about giving them a try, because I think again, like I think that that's such an incredible community within herpetoculture. They seem to be much tighter knit than a lot of other silos within herpetoculture, and there's a lot of shared information and shared knowledge there that's really cool. And I think that if Polychris found their way into a community like that, they would explode into a different level than where they are right now. So my opinion is the potential is there. And especially because unlike something like a panther chameleon, they can become really gregarious, friendly, handleable, tractable animals. Whereas though, like you're not really ever going to get that with a panther.
Yeah, well, that matters. There's a
they're
whole
not
bunch of
something you
people
want to
that
hold.
don't need to hold their animals and don't need to do a
Yeah,
certain thing. But I think what makes a super popular pet and animals
yeah,
that take off, they have to meet these certain qualities, right? Like
right.
they have to be, it sounds so crazy to say like a quality animal, but they do. You need to meet certain things. If you have these
Yep,
phenotypical diversities, that's absolutely
yep,
one. Handleability, that's absolutely another. I mean, even being a little obscure is actually an asset to them. Not
totally.
everybody has them, but they're obtainable. It's
Yeah,
I think from what I've learned from you today that they do probably have a pretty bright future if enough people like you get them first. If
exactly.
you can set a positive tone for their future in captivity, I think I know they're very different, but I see them almost fitting those giant anole type of
Totally.
caliber
Yes.
thing, like I think that
Yeah.
they need, being that they live in it, that, they're not, you can put them in a planted vivarium, which I think a lot of people like that, right? Like a lot of people
Yeah.
love that display style of keeping. They don't sound
Yeah.
overly destructive. They're not going to terrorize the tank. They're not, I mean, you know more than I do. I just think from what I've learned today, I think they do have a pretty promising future. I think that a
Yeah.
little bit of exposure, a little bit more information, and they sound like they'd be an awesome animal to have. You know, it'd be a privilege to be able to keep them. You know?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And then another factor that just came to mind when you were speaking there is that because they produce just one clutch a year and it's not a huge clutch, I think that will give them kind of more of a gradual build, which I think is actually a really good thing because
Absolutely.
one thing I've observed, in herpetoculture is that, like you mentioned, the giant anoles, like I think the blue beauty anole is a perfect example of this, where you have this really gorgeous animal that initially is really rare, but they have a really high reproductive rate. And very quickly, the market on those animals crashed because,
Sure
at least in
did.
my perception, because they started out $2,500 for an animal, and then like within 5 years, a lot of people were producing them, and
They got
you
too
can't
easy to get.
sustain. Yeah, exactly. And so you can't sustain that kind of market. And then of course, when the demand, it just messes with I think the longevity of a species like that in the hobby because it can fall prey to this boom bust cycle. And I think that species that have a lower reproductive rate have actually more potential for longevity because they're not going to immediately crash the market, if that makes sense.
Get
Oh yeah.
Parsons, Parsons
Yeah.
chameleons.
Yeah,
They're
exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
very well known. There's quite a bit of, good information. Always desirable, but
Yep.
good luck getting them. It's you're gonna
Yeah.
pay for it or you're gonna wait. It's
Yep.
or
yeah.
both.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally.
And speaking of
Yeah.
longevity, what is their lifespan? That's the one
Yeah.
thing we
Yeah. Yeah.
totally forgot to talk about.
Totally forgot to talk about it. Yeah. So I'm not sure, honestly, because these captive bred that I've been producing, they're the only ones I know of in recent
Okay.
years that were captive bred. But I think that Marmoratus, they can probably live 12 to 16 years would be an old one. I think, I've heard of people keeping them for up to 12 years, I think. My friend Caleb had one for a really long time. Um, Interestingly, I think that Peruvianus can live like twice that, like
Oh
25,
shit.
30 years.
I don't doubt it. The lack of
Um,
clutches, the lack of production leads me
yeah,
to think you're a long-lived animal.
yeah,
I mean, it just wouldn't make sense for
exactly.
nature to produce typically things that produce super super fast and in high
Yep,
numbers. They're not long-lived animals. It's
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that maybe Marboratus could live longer. Maybe they could live to be 20 or 30. Who
I
knows?
bet.
Yeah, we just
Um,
need that documentation. That's all.
we need exactly, and this is again why we need more people working with them. It's like, um, I have to be real with my own limitations about it. It's like my sample size, even though like I feel like I've helped kick the ball a little further down the field. There is still a long way to go before we hit the end zone with these lizards in terms of like really having them figured out. And I don't have the sample size of like, I'm not going to have 50 animals to work with and try and figure all that stuff out. I just can't do that here. So there's a lot that remains to be seen. But I think that, yeah, 12 years is probably a reasonable expectation for a captive bred Marmoratus, and maybe longer,
Okay.
hopefully.
Nice. All
Yeah.
right. And you want to hit him with your closer?
All right. I ask everybody the same question. We were all
Great.
kids and we're all kids that loved reptiles at one point. If you could give a 10-year-old child advice, a kid that wanted to grow up to do what you're doing, wanted to keep these animals, wanted to maybe turn it into a business, a social media platform, that wanted to grow up and live that life, this reptile life, what advice would you give a child just starting off in the industry?
That's such a good question. And it's like, it's one I feel like I really would have to, I'm sure if I think about it longer, I'll have a different answer, honestly. But I think that the thing I would say is just spend time with your animals every day. Make it a daily habit, a daily commitment. Because I think that, there's a lot we can learn from our animals, especially at that life stage in terms of discipline. and just commitment. And I think that was actually the primary thing I learned from keeping animals at that age, that looking back in hindsight. But I know a lot of people, peers at that time that were keeping animals that neglected them, and their animals didn't do well because of that. And it's easy to neglect things when you're at that age because you're young and you're easily distracted, and there's life's moving the way it does. So I would say the advice I would give is spend 20 minutes a day with your animal in some form or another, whether that's just changing water bowls and all that stuff, or just sitting and watching them. I think it's like I almost think about it like a practice, like playing an instrument. Pick up the instrument every day. Same thing. Spend some time with your animal every day. You're going to learn so much. And also I think that it's really therapeutic, honestly, to spend time with animals every day. So I think that also for a young person and living in the world we live in, that's so fast paced, it's so wild, and crazy as it is, slowing down and spending time with a lizard or a snake that asks you to move a little bit slower is a healthy thing. So that's the advice I would give.
Nice.
Great advice,
Like that.
man. Awesome
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, so I got mine, and like literally like the past few times it got a little almost teary-eyed with some when they tell us their answers with these ones. But it's all right, so what have been your biggest failures in this hobby? And it doesn't even have to talk about polychorus. It could be anything in the reptile hobby. And what have you learned from those?
Yeah. Honestly, I have a big one with Bleakers that I could talk about, which
Okay.
is the first clutch I had, which ended up I lost the female. And it was that lizard that I was talking about that I was really in love with. That was a really gregarious, friendly lizard. Her name was Gartho, and she was just this amazing lizard. That's why I fell in love with the species. And I was so excited because I bred these lizards. I'd got a wild caught male. I introduced her to. They bred. She was obviously carrying eggs. And I just did a bunch of things wrong in that initial clutch that I didn't know I was doing wrong. And I learned a lot from, but the ultimate cost of it was that lizard's life, which was a heartbreaker. So initially, basically what happened was I realized in hindsight, I think I was feeding her too much while she was gravid, and that she was like actually over conditioned. So like
Okay.
these are arboreal, they're slender lizards. And I think that she was basically overweight when I bred her. And I didn't know that because I didn't have a comparison. Like, I looked at her and I was like, this looks like a really amazingly healthy polychorus, But in hindsight, I'm like, oh, she was probably overweight. I was probably feeding her too much because she ended up producing a huge clutch. She produced 12 eggs.
Oh wow.
Which, again, for a lizard that's 75 grams, 12 eggs the size of an almond is a lot.
Oh yeah.
She looked like a stuffed sausage, before she
Damn.
started laying. And there were a couple things that were wrong with the laying parameters. And one is that I don't think she had the perfect nesting site, because this was before I was doing the elevated planters in the enclosure. So she was trying to nest in the ground level of the substrate, but I don't think it was actually warm enough down there. Even though I was like trying to keep it a little bit warmer, I was using like fans trying to get heat down there. It wasn't quite right. And so she spent a long time before laying digging test holes and all that stuff. And again, I have no frame of reference to know if this is normal, if it's not. So I'm just kind of like watching all of this with bated breath, trying to figure out what's going to happen. And it got to the point where finally she starts laying after like a week of digging test holes. And she lays 6 eggs. And then she climbs back up into the canopy and starts basking again. And I look at her and I'm like, you haven't laid all your eggs. Like, I can still see eggs in there. And, I could still see the outline of them on her abdomen. And so, I was on you can look on the working group and you'll see old posts if you look on there of this whole process, because I was typing it out, asking for advice from other people, not necessarily polychus keepers, but just other lizard keepers, like, what should I do? Is this normal? And most people were like, give her time. I've had lizards do this before, where they'll lay half a clutch, then they'll go bask, and then they'll go back and lay the other half. So she might do that. Just give her time. So I gave her another 24 hours. She didn't go back and start laying the rest of the clutch. And so I was like, okay, I need to do something. So I found a vet about 3 hours away that was willing to do surgery to remove the remainder of the eggs. And so I did it. I rushed down there, and it was a pretty big expense, to do emergency surgery on a tiny lizard. And they removed the egg successfully. And initially, she seemed like she was recovering from the surgery pretty well. For the first 4 days or so post-surgery, she was slowly improving. And then on like day 5, she just like nosedived. And by the end of the day, I lost her. And that was like just super devastating, because that, again, I had a really special relationship with that specific lizard. Like, that individual animal was just really special to me. And so again, that process was like, I was then, okay, a lot of this was just intuition, in terms of like how I responded to that and what I did differently for the subsequent clutches for my other females that I got down the road. I was like, okay, I think I fed her too much. I think that was too many eggs. So 12 eggs is a big clutch. And that's my impression. She looked huge. And so I'm going to do it a little bit differently next time in that regard. And then the other thing, again, like I said, is like, I'm going to offer an elevated nesting platform. So it's a different thermal gradient for it. Fortunately, those two things, again, just based on like kind of an intuitive read of things, ended up being variables that were really important for the subsequent 2 females that laid perfect clutches, recovered fine, didn't have any of the same issues. So I would say that was one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn as a herb keeper. It's just that's the price you pay, again, being on the kind of on the kind of front line with a species, right? I wasn't the first person to breed Polychrus marmoratus by any means. I know other people had done it before me, but I don't know that anyone's bred them more than once other than me. I think that most of those have been just kind of one-off events. For whatever reason, the species has never really had a person that's really stuck with them and tried to take it to that next level. And I'm trying to do that as well as I can, with my own limitations here. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I didn't have access to any information other than what I did, and I was doing the best I could with the information I had. But, sometimes that's what happens when you're doing that with these obscure things that you don't have a guidebook, and the lessons can be hard lessons if that's the case. So, yeah. Thanks for that question.
Oh yeah, man. Like,
really
I didn't know where we was gonna go. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've had a few guests come on. It was like, oh, we're about to start tearing up here, man.
Yeah, man.
So
yeah.
I've been kind of like, should I go before Ant goes, or just keep it at the end, and hopefully it's not gonna be all downhill from there, at the end. But it's all good.
That's really
so
good.
Where can everybody find you at?
Yeah. So you can find me. I'm on Instagram at Wellspring Herp is my handle there. Pretty responsive there. I try to be, at least. And my website, again, wellspringherpetoculture.com. That's where I got a bunch of husbandry articles about all the stuff I've kept on there. You can find my Polychrus article on there. And yeah, Facebook as well, where Arthur Blodgett is my name there. The main reason why I have Facebook is because of herb community, and also some like poetry and stuff, other interests that I have. But yeah, I'm super open to correspondence if anyone has questions or curiosities about these lizards, or is like, hey, I kept those at some point in the past, and this is what I learned about them. I would love to hear anything like that. So get at me with all that stuff.
Nice. You want to plug the podcast too?
Oh yeah, of course, the podcast, Project Herpetoculture.
Yeah.
So yeah,
What's
I
the
also
latest one?
co-host the podcast. The latest one was with John Asher from Crown Giants.
Okay.
He
Nice.
specializes in Crown Giants Anoles. And actually, we're going to be recording an episode here pretty shortly, but I'm actually going to be taking a step back from the podcast for a while. So,
oh wow,
Phil's going to be kind of kind of carrying it forward. But my life is just a little bit crazy right now, and I need to steal time from somewhere basically. And so
So,
we're going to be
yeah.
recording an episode soon for all of our listeners to kind of talk about that, explain what's going to happen. But I don't want to shock
Okay.
anybody sending them there to be like, oh yeah, and then I'm not there anymore. But anyway,
All right.
but yeah, also Happy Dragons. Again, I want to mention Happy Dragons. I'm going to stay involved there. I think we've got a pretty cool webinar coming up here pretty soon about establishing gradients. I've been
Nice.
working on kind of like a curriculum for herpetoculture, specifically for like if you're starting from square zero. This is like how I would teach people to think about herpetoculture so that they can do it themselves. That's kind of the idea behind these webinars. So come check it out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
Thanks again, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming
Oh,
on,
yeah,
man. I
definitely,
learned so
man.
much myself, dude. I mean, honestly, I love these episodes where I learn, I learn, we
Yeah.
do this for people to learn, but it's great when I get to learn too, it's selfish
Dude,
as it
yeah.
is. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's the fun thing about being a host. Yeah. I totally know what they're fun.
Right.
Oh yeah.
All right, everybody. It's great talking with y'all. You guys have a great day, morning, afternoon, whenever you guys are listening to this, and we'll catch you next time, okay? All right.
Later.
Peace out, everybody.
All right, cool. All right.
Yo, creeping in the dark, life nocturnal, dark and dark, both paths arboreal to terrestrial. Sticky toes gripping forest students that explore. Listen close, Gecko podcast, that's knowledge galore. Reptile talk, host Anthony and Jason. Trade secrets flow, no time wasted. From tropics to town, it's sight raining. With every chat, reptile game changing. Escaping heat waves, tan under rays, desert sand echoes, sun blazing days. Little hustlers, camouflage and maze, catch them speaking wisdom, the wild on replay. Reptile talk, host Anthony and Jason. Trade secrets flow, no time wasted. From tropics to town, it's sight raining. With every chat, reptile game changing. Sculling through the leaves, shadows unseen. Master of the skies, chameleon dream. Lizard tails flip, script getting clean. Gecko exchange, true reptile fiends. Reptile talk, host Anthony and Jason. Trade secrets flow, no time wasted. From tropics to town, it's sight raining. With every chat, reptile game changing. Scuttling through the leaves, shadows unseen. Master of disguise.